I have been married for 3 years. A new neighbor moved into the empty unit in the building where we lived, a single woman named Zena. One day, as I was coming home, I saw her in front of the building. It seemed she had been moving in for days. We both entered the building at the same time, and it was our first encounter. I greeted her warmly, and after introducing myself, I told her, "I'm mostly at home since my husband works during the day. Feel free to drop by any time or let me know if you need anything." Zena smiled and expressed her happiness. "That's wonderful. I'm mostly alone too, since my husband had to move to another city for work," she replied. It was then I realized she wasn't single after all. To make her feel welcome, I offered, "If you'd like, you can come by now." She nodded eagerly but said, "Great, I'll just go home to change my clothes. I'll be there in half an hour." While waiting, I brewed some tea and brought out a cake I had in the freezer. When Zena arrived, we started chatting about the weather and the rising prices of everything. Suddenly, she said, "The air here feels so heavy." I blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I've felt it ever since I came in. Haven't you noticed it yourself?" I hesitated but admitted, "You're right. I do feel it sometimes." When I served her tea, Zena asked, "Don't you have coffee?" I laughed. "What, you don't like tea?" "I love tea," she replied, "but if you had coffee, I could read your fortune." I lit up at her suggestion. "Really, that sounds amazing. I love coffee fortune readings," she smiled. "Seriously, you enjoy that?" "Yes. Do you know how to do it?" She nodded. "I do." Excited, I offered to brew some coffee, but Zena stopped me. No, it's fine. We already have tea. Save the coffee for next time." I insisted playfully. "If I let you leave without reading my fortune, I'll regret it." Laughing, I went to brew coffee for both of us. After finishing her coffee, Zena leaned back and began to read my fortune. What she said left me speechless. "I can't believe it," she murmured, her voice filled with wonder. She mentioned things she couldn't possibly know, details about our home, things my husband and I had recently bought, even items I had been planning to purchase. She continued, describing my husband's job and his age with startling accuracy. I stared at her in disbelief and finally asked, "Zena, where did you learn to read coffee fortunes?" She smiled mysteriously and said, "I didn't learn. Congenital. For as long as I can remember, I've had this innate gift. I could discern so much from the first cup of coffee I laid eyes on." When Zena told me about her coffee fortune-telling skills, I thought it was great to have her as a neighbor. Later that day, we chatted a bit more before she left. She seemed like a kind and genuine person. I liked her. The next day, 3 of my neighbors came upstairs to visit. During our chat, I told them about Zena, our new neighbor. I mentioned her skill in reading coffee fortunes. Saha, one of my neighbors who was absolutely obsessed with coffee fortune-telling, exclaimed, "I wish you'd called me." I chuckled and said, "It was so sudden. I just saw her at the door." Saha grinned mischievously. "Next time, invite me over. Tell her to read my fortune too." I laughed. "No need to rush. One day, I'll invite both of you over. You might even hit it off. She's such a warm, friendly girl." As we were chatting, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Zena standing there. "I was at home and thought I'd stop by for coffee and a chat," she said. "I don't really know anyone in this building yet." I smiled warmly. "You're very welcome and perfectly on time. Come in. We already have a neighbor here. Let me introduce you." When Saha saw Zena, her face lit up with excitement. I introduced them, and while they chatted, I went to brew coffee. After we finished our coffees, Zena read fortunes for both of us. Just like before, everything she said about me was uncannily accurate. What was more surprising was that Saha confirmed her reading as completely true as well. When Zena finished, Saha took out her purse to pay Zena. At first, Zena declined, saying it wasn't necessary, but after some insistence, she accepted the money. I didn't expect that at all. She was my neighbor, after all. Why would she accept payment? It felt wrong to me. Though I didn't say anything at the time, I decided I wouldn't ask her to read my fortune again. A week or two passed, and Zena visited me a few times. I welcomed her warmly each time, but only served tea, not coffee. One day, a neighbor from the first floor invited all the residents to an evening gathering. She knew that Zena was new and hadn't met everyone yet, so she asked me to invite Zena on her behalf. That evening, all the neighbors gathered in the first-floor apartment. It was a lively, cheerful atmosphere, and everyone seemed to be in high spirits. During the conversation, the host smiled mysteriously and said, "We have a very special guest with us tonight." Everyone looked around curiously, asking, "Who is it?" The host smiled and gestured toward Zina. "She's here," she said warmly. "Meet Zina John, our new neighbor." As everyone clapped politely, the host added with a teasing grin, "You know why she's special?" The room buzzed with curiosity as she continued, "Because she's a master at coffee fortune-telling. Everything she's said about me has been spot on, without exception." Excitement filled the room, and everyone began clamoring for a reading. Zina raised her hands to calm the chatter. "To avoid getting too tired," she began, "and to make sure I can read everyone's fortune accurately, I'll pick a few random people tonight." She added with a soft smile, "But from now on, every week, you're all invited to my house for coffee and fortune-telling. We can rotate and take turns so everyone gets their turn." That evening, Zina selected a few people and began reading their fortunes. Her accuracy stunned everyone. For example, when she read for Hannah, our host, Zina said, "You're pregnant through IVF." A hush fell over the room. Everyone turned to Hannah, who looked shocked. Then, after a pause, she nodded. "Yes," she admitted, "it's true." The fact that Zina had discerned this without any prior knowledge amazed us all. By the end of the evening, Zina had read for several neighbors. Out of respect, the first three who had their fortunes read took out money and offered it to Zina. It seemed like an unspoken tradition. Everyone knew that coffee fortune-telling came with a cost. Zina hesitated briefly before accepting the money with gratitude. Then she said, "I'm quite tired now. With your permission, I'll take my leave. But don't forget, next week you're all welcome to my house." The following week, we gathered at Zina's place. She welcomed us warmly, serving coffee with a professional flair. When it came time for the readings, Zina started with Mimi, our wealthiest neighbor. Mimi was older than the rest of us and carried herself with an air of elegance. She was also known for being mysterious about her personal life. Zina studied Mimi's coffee cup carefully. Her expression shifted into something almost grave. "I've never seen anything like this before," she said softly. The room grew silent. "Tell us," we urged, our curiosity piqued. Zina hesitated, her voice trembling slightly. It's so strange. I can't put it into words." She suddenly gasped, "My breath is tight. Please open the windows." We quickly obeyed, the tension in the room growing palpable. Turning back to Mimi, Zina said, "What I see in your fortune carries deep pain and sadness. I can feel it in every part of me." Mimi's eyes welled with tears. After a moment of silence, she murmured, "Only God knows the burden I bear." Zina nodded solemnly. "I see it clearly," she said. "It's heavy. It's difficult." None of us knew exactly what Zina had seen, but it was clear that Mimi understood. Zina then addressed the group. "With your permission, I'd like to focus solely on Mimi for now." The room murmured in agreement, and Zina turned to Mimi with a gentle but serious look. "There's something else," she said. "How can I say no to fear?" Mimi asked, her voice trembling. "All the neighbors know that I'm not speaking without reason, but I think someone has cast a spell on me." At these words, we all turned to look at Zina, wondering what she would say. Mimi's voice cracked as she continued, "What kind of spell? I don't have enemies, do I?" Zina's face softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry to say this, but you've been cursed with a death spell." We gasped in shock. The room fell silent. Mimi's eyes filled with tears as she asked, "Where can I find a prayer writer? I've lost touch with these things." Zina looked at her kindly. "Don't worry. If you want, I can help. Look how much God has blessed you by meeting me. I'll take care of it." Zina stood up and walked toward Mimi, gently comforting her. "You're not well now. Come to me tea and I'll explain everything in detail, including what must be done." With that, the conversation shifted and the party began to wind down. The next week, a heavy silence settled over the neighborhood. Zina hadn't hosted her fortune-telling party in days, and the sense of unease lingered like a thick fog. The neighbors exchanged nervous glances whenever they passed by her door, no longer sure whether they were in control of their lives or if they were puppets in Zina's hands. The evening, I was in the kitchen, cooking dinner. I thought my husband had come home early, but when I opened the door, I found it was Mimi standing behind the door, her eyes wide and bloodshot. I quickly brought her water, concerned. What happened, Mimi? She took the water with trembling hands and explained. It was Zina. She told me that my daughter-in-law had a dangerous death spell placed on me. She said I needed to give her 3 bracelets to break the curse. My heart sank as I listened, but I could sense the pain in her voice. Why would she do that? I've always loved her. I've given her gifts since the beginning of her marriage. Why would she want something like that? I couldn't help but question Zina's motives. How do you know she's right? How quickly did you believe her? Mimi hesitated before answering, her eyes clouded with doubt. Didn't you all say that the master of fortune-telling is? I thought it was all true. I shook my head. Fortune-telling and spells aren't the same thing. How does Zina know how to break a spell? She looked down, conflicted. Tomorrow, I'm supposed to give her 3 bracelets. What should I do? What if she lied? Mimi replied. What if he told the truth? A death spell is no joke. If what he said is true, we need to act fast. I looked at her, anxiety settling in. I don't think she told the truth. Mimi pulled out a small glass bottle from her bag, showing it to me. Zina gave this to me and told me to drink it tonight. Tomorrow, I'll go to her and give her 3 bracelets to lift the curse. Her words left me with an uneasy feeling, and I regretted not understanding the situation sooner. This talk of death, it's terrifying. Maybe if I were in your shoes, I'd be doing the same. The next day, Mimi went to Zina and handed over the 3 bracelets. Zina promised that she had lifted the spell. One day, as I was heading out to buy something, I heard voices from downstairs. The door to Zina's house opened, and someone was leaving. I thought she had dragged someone into her home, but when I looked down, I recognized the voice. It was a woman I knew. She was the one who had lived in the apartment before Zina moved in. I quickly realized that Zina had gathered information from my old neighbor, Raina, who had been a close acquaintance of mine. It was no coincidence that Zina knew so much about all of us. After Zina closed her door and went back inside, I hurried down to catch Raina. What are you doing here? How do you know Zina? Raina looked startled and stumbled backward. I didn't come out of Zina's home. I wasn't with her, she denied, but her words were shaky. So, who were you with in this building? You came out of one of these units. Raina shouted repeatedly that I should give you a refund. What's wrong with you? Our shouting made the neighbors come out. Raina saw them. She wanted to hurry out of the building. I wanted to take something that I couldn't get my hands on, so I took it from her purse strap. The strap of her purse tore, and it fell to the ground, opened. Whatever was in it was thrown out, and one of the things in her purse, which all the neighbors recognized, was a famous Mimi bracelet. We all figured out what had happened to Zina's fortune. Why did Zina pick up the neighbors' list at the first afternoon party that day to get their information from Raina? The neighbors gathered, picked up the bracelet, and went to Mimi's home. Then we all went to Zina's home together. When Zina saw the Mimis bracelet that the neighbors had brought, she went and brought 2 more bracelets. She returned back the monies to the neighbors. She left for 2 weeks. After a while, another family came to the apartment. They were a good and healthy family,